Hello and welcome to Clearing the Haze. I'm your host, Chuck Marting, author of the newly recognized Amazon #1 bestseller, Mastering the Impairment Code. And today, we're kicking off one of the most important and honestly one of the most transformative series that I've ever done on a show. This is the first episode in our Mastering the Impairment Code series, and I'm calling today's conversation the Zero Blind Spot Philosophy: How Leaders Learn to See What Everyone Else Misses. So if you followed my word, you've gone through my book, my trainings, or my speaking, you already know something. Most leaders don't fail because they're careless. They fail because they're blind to what's right in front of them. And that blindness doesn't come from a lack of intelligence or experience. It comes from fear, hesitation, assumptions, and the belief that someone else will catch it. But here's the reality. In every workplace, in every fleet, in every job site, and in every office, someone is impaired today. And the only question is whether the people around them can recognize it. So you see, today we're going to break down exactly why leaders miss the signs and why they doubt themselves, why they hesitate, and how they can begin to see what others overlook. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand why the zero's blind spot mindset changes everything, how your brain filters out danger, the difference between looking and seeing, and the first step in training your mind to recognize impairment before it becomes a crisis. So let's get started. First, the big problem that leaders think they're seeing everything. Now, most supervisors and managers believe they are observant, but under stress, routine, and even time pressure, humans stop noticing details. You see, your brain filters out what it believes is unnecessary. So you ignore micro behaviors, inconsistencies, subtle changes until something goes terribly wrong. When I was investigating a reported robbery at a grocery store one week, it was about a week prior to Christmas, and I observed a lot of behavioral clues that were coming from the person that was reporting the robbery to me, and it just was not adding up. You know, active listening skills allow someone to speak uninterrupted, and it helps you to hear things that the individual speaking will end up contradicting themselves or saying something in their story that they don't realize that they're telling you. Sometimes they forget, sometimes they're just oblivious to it. But when they've had previously stated something, the fact has changed and then the story goes awry. So when I first contacted this individual, they allowed me to walk past them several times, didn't flag me down, didn't say anything to me. They just stood there. So that right off told me that something was going on. This wasn't typical behavior for somebody who was just robbed. You see, when I looked at the person, there was a lot of hesitancy in that individual's tone of voice. And then his reaction was totally opposite, like I said. He was just robbed. You see, the story was that he happened to begin to go outside and he was coming into this store to pay some bills. And as he was coming in, he was robbed. Somebody came up to him at gunpoint and they asked for all of his money. They actually demanded it. And he said, I gave it to him, and they took it. Now, I was sorry that he experienced this, but we should be able to resolve this quite quickly, pointing at a lot of different factors. And as I listened to him, I allowed him to tell his story. And he began to contradict himself a little bit. He ended up talking about how he was walking into the front door when he got robbed. But then later in this story, he talked about how he was robbed just as he exited his car. And he said this in this story like it was the first time that I've heard him speak this. And so there were a lot of different things that were going on that just didn't add up. So I waited until he finished. And then I looked at him and I said, I'm sorry this happened to you. But you know what? We should be able to resolve this pretty quickly. And then I pointed and I said, you see the surveillance cameras out here on top of the lights? All we're going to need to do is go inside and talk to the manager, tell him what happened, review the tape. You can identify the people and we'll have everything that we need. Now, after saying this and looking at this individual's, I saw his pupils dilate. He began to stutter a little bit. And you could tell that he became extremely uncomfortable with this information that I just shared with him, to which he said, well, I need to tell you the truth. You see, as it turns out, he wasn't worried about not having enough money to be able to purchase gifts for his family. He was just worried about using that money and not paying his bills. And so this was right before Christmas, and he felt the easiest way to resolve this issue was to report that he was robbed. So he would have a police report to give to his creditors, who would then feel empathy for him and postpone the payments and not say that they were late, giving him more time to not only pay off his debts, but also giving him the money that he felt that he needed to pay for Christmas with his family. Now, I took this as a learning opportunity with this individual. It could have gone a lot of different ways at this point. One, it was at Christmas time. Two, I could understand why he did what he did, but also understanding that what he was doing was false reporting, which could have put him in jail. But I chose to take this opportunity not to judge him, but to show empathy, especially during the holidays. So I advised him, you need to pay your payments so that it wouldn't hurt yourself, won't hurt your family by falling behind, and then you're going to have to catch up. You see, sometimes being harsh and cruel, even when somebody is caught lying, is not always the easiest answer. But the opportunity to change someone's behavior and help them understand the consequences of their actions, that can be the best lesson learned. And especially in this situation, I felt that this was the best lesson that he could have to understand that what he was doing wasn't going to give him the results that he was after. Now, there is a hidden psychology in blind spots. You see, blind spots come from familiarity, okay? Like, I've known this employee for years. Or it comes from fear. What if I accuse someone and I'm wrong? Or it comes from emotional bias. He's a good guy. He wouldn't do this. And then it goes to a cognitive overload with you trying to figure out what is going on with this individual. But the key line is this: leaders don't miss signs because they're bad leaders. They miss them because they're human. You see, the power of presence is looking versus seeing, all right? So looking is passive. Seeing is intentional. Seeing requires observation without judgment, and judgment stops observation. So observers begin to recognize behavioral patterns, but you have to be able to learn to distinguish the two. And that's something that we train leaders how to do all the time. So I guess some of the best examples that I can give you of this is changes in body stance or movement when you're talking to somebody, how they avoid eye contact with you, or they become overly agreeable, or there's a subtle speech pattern shift with that individual and how they normally talk it. Now, the fear barrier is something that's very real when it comes to these things, especially for leaders. Now, fear of being wrong is probably the number one cause of inaction with leaders. They don't know if they're right. Sometimes they second guess themselves, but they don't want to be accused of being unfair, or that they're bullying somebody, or they're targeting somebody. So they allow that fear to overtake them in becoming an indecision for them, or not making that judgment call at that point in time. There's also the fear of an HR escalation. So now that I've done this, this person is going to go and file a complaint with HR, and this is going to go totally to the right on me. And I'm going to be in the office trying to explain my actions and what happened. this is a very real fear with leaders. But there's also that fear of conflict. None of us want to be put in a position where conflict is going to exist, where we're going to have to justify the things that we're seeing and why we're doing it and being in that confrontational situation with an employee. There's also the fear of paperwork. Man, this is going to be a lot of paperwork for me. Is it really worth it? You know? Or it's the fear of emotional reactions. What if they start saying that I'm racist? What if they say that I've been targeting them and that I just want to see them get fired or have to leave the company? What if they say, well, I'm setting them up? These are all very real fears that leaders go through. Now, a supervisor asked me, how did you do that when I was talking to an employee one time that he was talking to, and he was really lost? And I could see him just falling apart in front of his employee. And I saw the reaction out of the employee. And if I didn't act at that point, this was going to go very badly. And so knowing that my place was just to be there to test, I didn't want to become overly authoritative with this individual because I really didn't have any authority with them. I was just an outside vendor coming in to follow their policies and procedures in doing a drug test. But, you know, after I calmly got that impaired person that we were dealing with to open up, my one word answer to that supervisor when he asked me, how did you do that? And being able to change the whole tone of that situation to get this individual to calm down, to listen to what I was saying to them, and then of their own free will, admitting to what had happened that night, that they'd been drinking. Now, that one word is empathy. You see, I showed that individual that I cared. Not that I wanted to grab him and shake him because of the way he was acting, but, you know, the truth of it is that by relating to what is and what was shared, and as a result, asking open-ended questions to this individual that would require detailed answers from him, so he would have to get into another space in his mind to think about the things that I was talking to him about, and doing it in a way that I was calm with him, it also brought him down. And he started to realize what was going on in his behavior and how he was acting. You know, I have found that 90% of the individuals that we speak to in this matter, they end up telling us what is going on, whether it's addiction, whether it's substance use, they're afraid about what's going on or what will happen to them as an end result because of their behavior. This gives you as a supervisor the ability to tell them what that company policy is, why you're doing what you're doing, and what the next steps in this process are. Because believe it or not, even though they have been caught doing this, they are now realizing their most common fear of being caught and now having to justify it. One of the things that we teach is 100% accountability. And we talk about that in Mastering the Impairment Code. You know, it's one of those things that it's hard to find in today's society as individuals that don't blame somebody else for the behaviors or the actions that they have. And it's something that you have to teach people because it's not ingrained. If you look at every aspect of our society right now, people are justified, or they feel that they're justified, or we have allowed this to happen where somebody gets caught and the first thing they say is, well, what about Mary? She does this, this, and this all the time, and you're not talking to her. Well, the reality is how does this individual know that you haven't talked to Mary, or that Mary's not working on the behavior that he's obviously seeing, that now that he's in a panic of getting in trouble himself, feels that he needs to throw out, so that you can see that Mary's problem is much more bigger than mine. So why are you wasting your time with me? It's all in how we communicate with somebody, and understanding that the reason you're doing the things that you're doing is, one, for the safety of everyone in the workplace, but it's also the policies of the company. It's what are the next steps and what needs to be done, not because you're wanting the person to be fired, but because you're having to do this in an orderly fashion that takes into account not only the individual that you're talking to, but the workplace as a whole. Now, the key line for this is fear keeps workplaces unsafe. Awareness makes them safe. Now, the zero blind spot mind shift is something that I have found that is so powerful. Now, zero blind spots doesn't mean perfection by any means. What it does mean is refusing to ignore what your gut is telling you. Leaders can ask, something feels off. Can you help me understand what's going on? That is one of the big questions that I have them use. It's an open-ended question. It allows the individual to, one, notice that you're recognizing that something is going on. But number two, you want them to explain to you what is going on, giving them that opportunity. Now, curiosity often overcomes judgment. And it's that mind shift that we're talking about with an individual. And that is what your key is. And the thing that you're trying to do is showing curiosity, that you're not being judgmental, that you're allowing them to go through the process with you to help you in understanding what is going on. Now, the first skill in this is pattern recognition. We end up seeing these individuals in our workplace and the places that you work more than their own families do. So you're going to be able to recognize things automatically. That's why I train leaders in the workplace to have a 30-second check-in with somebody that's zero blind spots, asking questions just like what we went over. Something feels off. Can you help me understand what it is what's going on? Those are the type of questions that show empathy and concern. It's not confrontational. It's not something that somebody should feel defensive. Now, could they? Sure. Anybody can take things in a certain way, especially when they're impaired under the influence of drugs or alcohol. But it's one of the best ways that I have found to be able to diffuse a situation and to be able to pinpoint what is going on with this individual. Now, impairment is rarely one big sign. It's been something that's gone on repeatedly in a pattern that now we have definitely identified it, and now we have to address it. It can be small, it can be subtle, but inconsistent changes form a pattern. And leaders must connect those micro signals to the things that you're seeing, and then being able to go to the individual that you're seeing this with and ask them questions in a empathetic and caring way. Now, let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about micro signals that leaders should be able to key in on. Delayed responses with these individuals. They're repeating questions to you, over explaining the situation or what's going on. Restlessness, being very uneasy, being in your presence, or even having that conversation with you. And then they have a variety of emotional swings, going from being sad to anger to being violent, things like that. These are all things that we need to be aware of, and they go right into those subtle pattern recognitions that we're talking about, things that your gut is telling you there's something going on. And that's going to help you informing your awareness, so then you know what actions you need to take. Now, awareness without action is just feeling, okay? There has to be more than that. So action doesn't always mean, though, that it has to be discipline. So we need to have that distinction as well. But action does mean that you ask questions, that you're pulling someone to the side, by themselves, not confronting them in front of a whole group. And then in that conversation that you're having with them, actively listening and then redirecting the conversation, having the individual answer your questions to help you in identifying what is going on with them. Then when that happens, we need to offer help. We need to give them some hope and some understanding that we get it. We understand what's going on. Now let me help you. And then we need to document these things. Document the conversations that you've had with that individual in the workplace. Document the things that have been heard and seen and what you feel needs to take place. Then, based on the totality of all those things, deciding that you need to do a reasonable suspicion drug and alcohol test, or if that's the appropriate step that needs to be taken at this point because of the conversations that you've had, and determining it may be stress, it could be other things that are involved, family issues. A lot of that stuff pours over to the workplace, and you all know that. So we need to identify it. We need to understand what drugs do and be looking for those signs and symptoms of impairment when we're talking to an individual. Documentation is your best thing with these situations, to be able to have that and to be able to go to your HR with. So you're going to have to contact your HR or your safety people as early as possible to advise them of the situations that you're having. Now, as we wrap up this first episode in the Mastering the Impairment Code series, I want you to sit with one truth, one thing that I want you to think about. Your ability to see determines your ability to lead. So think about it. Your ability to see determines your ability to lead. Leaders who ignore their blind spots aren't just risking productivity, they're risking lives. They're risking careers, they're risking families, and they're risking futures. You see, the zero blind spot philosophy isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about being aware. It's about refusing to walk past red flags because they're uncomfortable to address. You know, in the coming episodes, we're going to break down the full impairment code, the 7 layers of modern impairment, the psychology behind hesitation, and the practical strategies to become the leader people trust when something doesn't feel right. I want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone who's picked up the book, Mastering the Impairment Code, now officially being recognized as an Amazon #1 bestseller. How cool is that? And if you haven't grabbed your copy yet, it's available on Amazon, and it's quickly becoming the go-to resource nationwide. So thanks for being here. Thanks for doing the hard work. And as always, stay safe, stay aware. And until we talk to you next week with our next episode in this series, keep clearing the haze. Take care.